You deserved everything you got. This is a union city.
That is a Philadelphia tradition.
Seize the means of podcasting.
Oh, God, the bosses crushed us.
Let me tell you one thing else.
In oldie-timey times,
Who said it? Kanye West or Thomas
we
Paine?
will not have raw dog reality for that one.
The pleasure of the flesh is in solidarity.
The Scab Buster.
It's going to be wholly unprofessional.
Keep together strong. Let that be your mantra.
I got my cop sunglasses on for you, Gabe.
I
Can you
like
see
it.
yourself in them?
I'm riding for Biden right now.
Hello and welcome to the Labor Joint Podcast, where we mash potato. Do the twist? Can you tell me, baby?
What's
like it,
taters, eh?
God damn it, Gabe. God fucking damn it. I lost my pan, sir. I lost my pan because of you. Hello, my name is... it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
I'm Gabe.
What is your name?
I'm Gabe.
Gabe. I like wearing these cop sunglasses. It makes me feel so intimidating.
Yep. Gives you a sense of power.
That I usually don't have in this dynamic between me and you, do we? Okay, and you're Gabe Christie.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I don't want to...
You're Sam James.
Yes, thank you. And today, we're going to learn about...
So there's a union that busts its balls for you doing a lot of shit work you take for granted. It's called AFSCME. And in 1975,
are there brawls to make sure your kids don't get run over by the fucking cars?
Yeah. Yeah, so in 1975, AFSCME and two other unions of Commonwealth employees in Pennsylvania went on strike.
Okay.
And this was the first statewide strike of state employees in American history. So we're going to talk about that.
All right. I like it.
So we need to get some backstory on like public employee strikes because there's a mixed history there. Weirdly, one of the first was actually the 1919 Boston Police Department strike.
What?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So, and then Governor Calvin Coolidge put down that police strike by calling in the National Guard to use them as strike breakers to be cops. So, like,
wait a minute.
No
doing
winners in this situation.
All right.
Okay, so that was like the first major public sector strike. Then there were a couple in the 20s, nothing really major. And then the expansion of federal labor law in 33 and 1935 really just focused on the industrial sectors. So that left farm workers, domestic workers, and public employees out of the mix. Farm workers and domestic workers were left out because racism, and
yes,
public employees because they wanted to make sure that the machines of bureaucracy kept turning.
Friend of the show, racism.
Yeah, it keeps showing up in literally every episode. We should probably do something about that. So it was in the 1930s, though, that AFSCME, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees.
I'd appreciate it if it's instead of ask me, you actually said it the whole thing through every single time for me. Okay.
Please. Careful, because I will.
This is our dirty talk, everybody. Okay.
Okay. So this changed in the later, so they formed, but they didn't really do much striking early on. That changed, especially in Philly, in the later 30s when sanitation workers went on strike and formed the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees District Council number 33, led by William J. McKenty, who is a Philly municipal truck driver. And then that kind of solidified the union's ability to lead strikes of municipal workers. But they still focused mostly on just doing it like within cities. Okay. They hadn't quite gotten to doing a full statewide strike. And they're also operating in like this weird legal limbo. So technically, they didn't have legal protection to form a union. Yeah, so there was even some federal law that prevented them from unionizing, but that, like, there were a lot of things where technically they couldn't, and they just kind of did, and no one really fought them on it.
All right.
Okay, so that changed in Pennsylvania in October of 1970 with the passage
I like
of House Bill 195, which allowed public sector...
That's a sexy passage.
Oh, yeah. So that allowed for public sector union recognition, bargaining, and striking. So now unions in Pennsylvania had legal protections to strike. When that happened, Jerry McKenty, who was the son of William J. McKenty, who was the guy, his DC-33 truck driver. So he grew up in an organizer family, and according to his biography, he started organizing in 1956, but like he was the son of the founder of DC-33. So he'd been organizing since he could walk.
Yeah, it's in the blood.
Yeah. He saw that law passed and was like, oh, we need to take immediate advantage of this and go on a crazy organizing drive. So he literally went down to a gas station, bought a map of Pennsylvania, and then using a pen, just circled every single PennDOT depot, all of their truck depots.
Okay.
So he just circled every single one that was listed on the map, and then roughly estimated how many workers were in each depot, figured out how many workers were, or how many PennDOT workers there were across all of Pennsylvania, none of whom were in the union at this point. And then he pitched that to the president of, or he literally took the map to the president of AFSCME, Jerry Werf, and said, give me $2 million and I'm going to organize all of these guys. That's basic. Yeah. Werf agreed, gave him $2 million, and then they disbanded, not like just handing him $2 million in cash.
That's what it sounded like, but
yeah, he was authorized to spend $2 million.
If he came up with that proposal to me, I'd give him $2 million. Shit,
yeah, just I'd find briefcase and go have fun.
We would like to let the IRS know that Labor John does not make $2 million.
Yeah, I don't think we're like scraping by breaking even with our $2 million overhead annually. So,
of course, non sequitur over.
Okay, so then they disbanded District Council 26, which had been that was the state employees union prior to that.
Yeah.
And then they reorganized it as the Pennsylvania Organizing Committee. And so the committee was made up of two dudes, William McKenty and Bernard Buck Martin, and they brought on two other guys, Edward Keller and Pat Salvatore. So over the next 2.5 years, they basically just drove across Pennsylvania and did on the ground organizing, focusing primarily on maintenance workers, trades workers, and basically highway staff. So toll takers, stuff like that. And by 1973, they had tens of thousands of workers organized. And had a master bargaining agreement signed.
Jesus.
Yeah. So they spent that $2 million well.
Yeah.
And so then they reorganized all of those workers into District Council 13, which was the Pennsylvania State Employees Union. First contract, 1973. That was set to expire on July 1st, 1975.
Okay.
This meant that they would be negotiating against Pennsylvania Governor Milton J. Shapp.
No, the Shapster's back.
Yep. There's also some interesting political business going on behind the scenes
Okay.
with the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees and Mr. Shapiro. AFSCME had been able to get a pretty decent contract and organize a bunch of Commonwealth employees, and they did all of that without striking.
Okay. All right.
And William Eckenbarger, I think. So he was a reporter for the Harrisburg desk of the Inquirer, and in a fairly long article, basically laid out that the reason why AFSCME was able to do all of this without striking was twofold. One, the governor was absolutely fucking terrified of a strike happening while he was in power.
Okay.
Because especially in an election year, because that would mean that he would have to answer to the public as to why services were shut off. So then, additionally, the union had donated a large amount of cash to Shap's campaign. AFSCME raised the funds through a raffle, since you can't use union dues as political contributions.
Oh my God. What goddamn crime syndicate was also involved in this?
That I didn't find any outside involvement, but the state police commissioner did say that the contributions were illegal and argued that the state civil service commission should investigate. Shap said, "No, they're not. It's my money and I'm keeping it," basically. So we should also point out that Eckenbarger seems to be primarily concerned with trimming the state budget by cutting benefits and pay for state employees.
No.
So take all of this with a huge grain of salt. He just seems to be really upset that, like, he seemed genuinely upset that state employees weren't going on strike because them not striking meant that they were happy. And so he wanted strikes to happen because that meant that the union was having to fight for everything.
I didn't sign up for this, Gabe.
Yeah. So I don't particularly like him. I just wanted to make mention of, like, because he's the only one that talked about kind of the political backsphere of all of this.
Okay.
So take all of that analysis with a big grain of salt.
I will. And I appreciate the liberal use of the word sphere in your lexicon, Gabe. Thank you.
We need to build an actual labor sphere.
We have, Gabe. $2 million, baby. $2 million.
Getting back to why we're here. Negotiations started in 1975, and there were still active organizing drives going on within the union. And these drives, unsurprisingly, faced some pushback from management. For instance, in May, there was a grievance filed against the State Game Commission when it was alleged that they had hired a private detective to spy on 4 game wardens who had been active in the organizing drive. One of the major complaints was that the PI had tracked their movements, as well as followed their wives and one of their 11-year-old children while they were out jogging. So they caught the PI, and then he initially denied any connection to the state, and then then admitted that he was hired by the State Game Commission, but that he was conducting a work habits survey, specifically of 4 people and their families, and not during work hours. And so AFSCME filed grievances about that. And so you started to see, like, the Shap administration, even though they had been very friendly with the union up until now, they were starting to be a little bit less friendly. With that in mind, let's get back to bargaining. So negotiations had pretty much stalled out by early June. The administration was keeping everything at 3.5% wage increases. And then they were also planning to deinstitutionalize the Retreat State Hospital, which was one of the major mental health facilities. And they wanted to move all of those patients to other medical facilities or community care.
Okay.
And this was the pre-Reagan era when most mental health patients were in state-run facilities.
Oh no.
Both good in that they were being provided care. It's very bad in terms of the care that they were being provided.
Yeah.
And like the level of abuse that was administered there. So as we talk about all of this, let us not forget that a lot of the people involved in this bargaining were not necessarily great people, or were at least part of a very bad system. But the wage demands for all of the rest of the union are good and justified, because highway workers deserve lots of money to
Huzzah.
keep things running smoothly until we replace all of them with trains.
The workers or the roads?
Yes, the workers. We're keeping roads. We're just replacing workers with trains. We're just going to put a steam engine out on the turnpike and have it fix potholes. So McKenty and the bargaining committee said that they were going to demand a raise as high as 11%. They never they never publicly specified how much they were going to ask for, but they said that they were going to ask for up to 11%. When pressed about the cost to the state budget, McKenty said that he would it could lead to a raise in state taxes, but it was necessary to ensure that state employees received a fair and decent wage for a fair day's work, which is fair enough. But again, the governor wasn't budging from 3.5%, so they were stuck at an impasse.
Yes.
And what do you do when you are at an impasse in negotiations?
I would strike.
Exactly. Between 10 and 20,000, the 10,000 estimate is from the police. The 20,000 estimate is from the union.
Oh, I believe the police?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, you have their sunglasses, so. Marched up to the state capitol to protest Governor Shapp's lack of movement in the budget negotiations. They massed on the steps of the Capitol building, held speeches, and showed their power, just in numbers. So according to the state, 64.9% of the 106,000 state employees showed up to work, and that there was minimal impact on bureaucratic functions.
Okay.
But really, the purpose of the demonstration was to just show power in numbers and kind of scare them. So the strike was unannounced, and no one from the union would actually call it a strike or a slowdown. They basically just referred to it as a gathering or an unplanned day off.
Picnic.
Yeah. And so it was like, it wasn't quite a wildcat strike. It just wasn't because the union supported it. It was just an unannounced and potentially illegal strike, since there wasn't a strike authorization vote or a strike notice. So that was the first kind of like escalation in all of this.
Okay.
And they only did that for one day. It was just a big worker holiday to go and try and scare the governor a little bit. But just a couple days later, they had the Pennsylvania AFL-CIO convention at the Bellevue Hotel. And one of the keynote speakers for the PA AFL-CIO convention was Governor Shapp. So 200 AFSCME members filled the front row seats of the lecture hall, facing the stage. And then Governor Shapp came up to speak to the convention. He began to discuss his plans for deinstitutionalization. That's a really hard word to say. Deinstitutionalization of the state hospital system, and moving mental health patients to other facilities. And the moment he brought that up, all 200 AFSCME members silently stood up and walked out of the convention.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So weirdly, the other unions there started booing them, and apparently there was some internal argument with the Pennsylvania AFL-CIO as to whether or not their claims or their demands were justified. because other unions were upset that it would mean a raise in taxes for their membership. And this is also like, this is one of the tricky things you do get into with public sector bargaining, but you kind of, the workers deserve a decent wage. So Schaap responded to the walkout by talking about how the 3.5% wage increases were entirely fair and that he couldn't offer anything more without raising taxes. He also added that this would be in addition to the 4 to 5% wage increases that were guaranteed to all state employees regardless of union status. Finally, he added that deinstitutionalization was necessary to streamline public health. AFSCME responded to that by saying that the average state employee made about $9,227, which is around $53,000 today, and that a 10 to 11% wage increase was in line with the increases offered to Turnpike, SEPTA, and state police workers.
Okay.
I think they were, especially considering that they were offering this to state highway employees, they figured they should get at least as much as the Turnpike employees,
Sure.
Which makes some sense. And McKenty was also like, he was very clear that he was willing to negotiate on that. He just wanted to be put in the ballpark.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, like, get us around 11% and we'll figure it out from there. He was refusing to start at 3.5% because that was going to be bad.
Yeah.
And this was also a period of pretty high inflation, and like it was not necessarily a booming financial time for a lot of people. It was looking more and more like the July 1st deadline was going to hit and they were going to go on strike. June 30th, the day before that deadline, 600-member AFSCME policy committee was holding a meeting. They had to be, because they were ready, or they had to be ready to respond to any bargaining agreement that Schaap offered. So they were basically in session all day.
Okay.
McKenty stepped out of the meeting to go and have another discussion with Schaap. He returned saying that the governor wasn't budging from 3.5%. So while they were in that meeting, Governor Schaap signed the $4.5 billion state general fund budget with $27.5 million to finance a 3.5% wage increase. So without having an offer approved, he signed the budget.
Schaapster, I wrote a song about you, motherfucker.
They signed the 3.5% wage increase into the budget. McKenty explained to the membership that this is an attempt to break the union. They want to take us on and break us because we've come too far in a short time and because we have too much to say about the power structure.
All right. I like it.
Yeah, it's good rousing speech. So an additional piece of their demands was that the governor appoint a neutral third-party arbiter to pass determination on all negotiations. So at this point, it was basically just Schaap's personally appointed negotiators versus the union bargaining committee, or the union negotiating committee. And they wanted to bring in a third-party mediator. Some rank and filers were actually annoyed by this because the part of that ruling was that if the state arbiter or if the neutral mediator said like no, 3.5% is actually a justifiable offer, then you have to take it. So some rank and filers were upset by that because they're saying that welfare recipients got a 7% increase. If the arbiter decided it, then they could get stuck with a 3.5% increase. And they weren't necessarily willing to play by those rules. Mm-hmm. At 6:35 p.m., a strike vote was called by the policy committee, which at that point represented 76,000 state employees across all sectors of the Commonwealth. That passed, and then that strike was immediately joined by 10,000 members of the Pennsylvania Social Services Union, and 3,000 members of the Pennsylvania Nurses Association. Then there were also 3,000 members of the Retail Clerks Local 1357 who worked in state liquor stores. And
okay.
they were expected to join the picket lines. So liquor store employees were demanding a 3-year contract with a 29% wage increase and cost of living adjustment escalator for the last 2 years. These demands were based off of wins from a Philly area grocery store union that got basically all of that from a contract in January of 1975, which I will now look up for a future episode. So in total, there was around 90,000 workers that could potentially go on strike on July 1st.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah. July 1st, strike begins and initially no one was really showing up to their shift at midnight anyway. But as the day continued, more and more people showed up on the picket lines. And the state justice department had pre-prepared injunctions against essential services workers because basically they had the rule that like if there's a life-threatening situation, you have to break the strike.
Yeah.
That being said, the state attorney general said that he was not going to allow any injunctions to pass until someone assured him that human life was at stake. Like, relatively fair there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much I would trust that, but it's at least good rhetoric.
That's all that matters.
Yeah. So by the end of the day, there were 85,000 workers that had walked out. The Retail Clerks Union decided to wait out negotiations last minute and extended their contract. But AFSCME, the State Civil Service Union, and the Nurses Association were all out in full numbers. Multiple state functions ground to a halt. Welfare, food stamps, unemployment benefits, all of those offices were closed or were either closed or run by a skeleton crew of just managers.
Okay.
And so basically people were being told like, if you're on Social Security or welfare or unemployment or anything, just expect a check in the mail. Don't show up to the office because
hey, all right, I'll take
doors
that.
are going to be closed. Yeah. Like you're not getting it. They're going to get mailed. Guards from a few state correctional facilities also didn't show up to work, despite the fact that they were barred from striking. Their positions were then filled by state troopers.
Oh, no.
And they were slowly basically just forced back to work. There were also a bunch of state hospitals, and doctors, community volunteers, and supervisors were filling in for all the nurses, including preparing cold cut sandwiches. The Inquirer kept talking about cold cut sandwiches. Like, there were at least 2 or 3 articles that mentioned them specifically.
Were they hoagies? Or they?
I'm assuming it was just like white bread, a couple pieces of salami, or probably like horrible bologna.
Okay.
And then mayo, presumably.
Okay. Now I want a cold cut sandwich though.
So those were being prepared in the hospitals by doctors and volunteers, and then there were also some volunteers that made them for prisoners. Now we're going to switch out to the picket lines. They had shown up, or they had started to form up around all of the state offices, especially in Philly and Harrisburg, and the police started to form around the pickets in front of all of these state buildings. Because they were allowed to picket, but because it was a state building and state property, they couldn't prevent anyone from entering legally. So you could set up a picket line out front and you could yell at anyone who was scabbing, but technically you couldn't prevent anyone from entering the building. because
All
once you
right.
block an entrance to a state
Yeah.
building, that's obstruction and all this nonsense. The pickets appeared to be relatively peaceful. There's one account of one guy getting assaulted because he was crossing the picket line, and Charles M. Leidig yelled at him, and then, at least from the pictures, looked like he took a couple swings at him as he was trying to enter the Department of Transportation building in Harrisburg. So then Leidig basically immediately got grabbed by cops and arrested.
Yeah.
That'll happen.
Yeah.
Especially when you're doing that at a picket line that's already surrounded by police.
Well, they wouldn't say it was the smartest guy.
By the second day, police were reporting there were 17 arrests for charges ranging from assault to blocking highways to rock throwing, and my absolute favorite charge, malicious mischief.
Ooh, fuck the band name.
Uh-huh.
Fuck no, screw that, man. That's the new podcast name.
Malicious mischief?
Yeah.
I like it.
Now, that's when we do our murder one.
Ooh, yeah.
The murder cast.
Well, there is a Pennsylvania labor murder story. It's technically Pittsburgh.
Yeah, we can fudge a couple letters in there. We can make it Philadelphia.
So the Schaap administration responded to the strikes with two fronts. One, they rejected binding arbitration, so they weren't going to bring in a state mediator. And then they went to the Justice Department and started demanding injunctions. There were 8 lawsuits filed on Tuesday, July 2nd, including 2 injunctions against striking workers. From what I can tell, none of them went very far. But they were at least trying to break up all of the picket lines. Another weird note from this is that state parks were closed. And this was also July 4th. So everyone was going out to state parks for vacation.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of very pissed off campers who were getting turned away. But then, so they were turning away new campers, but if you were already in the park, you were allowed to stay. There just weren't any. Yeah. Like they weren't going to kick you out. But there just weren't any rangers there to like help you.
Yeah.
It's just camp at your own risk. But so third day of the strike brought about the first major victory for the Schaap administration. 454 nurses were forced back to work at the Commonwealth or by the Commonwealth Court at 4 state hospitals. An additional 3,300 nurses with the Pennsylvania Nurses Association returned to work under an agreement with the Commonwealth Court. They had voluntarily entered into the agreement under the understanding that the court would reconsider the state's injunction if the negotiations broke down. So basically they were saying like, we will return to work so long as negotiations continue. The moment they look like they're slowing down again, we're back out the doors.
Okay.
So state and nurse negotiations continued. You still have around like 76,000 to 80,000 people out on strike at this point.
Yeah, that's a lot.
So sizable. Then the Schaap administration was able to force AFSCME engineers, technicians, and administrative workers back to work at multiple state hospitals, along with mental health facilities and some other state-run like clinics and community care institutions. And that was basically because they were saying they were getting complaints from doctors saying that like these things or stuff is breaking and that's impacting patient care. So they have to come back to work.
I can see where that would.
Yeah. neither the state nor the union was willing to budge in negotiations. McKenty was still at 11%. Shap was still at 3.5%. And things were starting to get a little bit strenuous for the union because none of them had large strike funds to support them.
Yeah, that's
in
not good.
an extended strike. I mean, at this point, it was only 3 days loss of pay, which isn't great, but like for the most part, you can usually survive that.
Yeah, it's survivable.
The lowest paid workers would probably be
fucked.
They'd be feeling it, but there are like, hopefully within the union, there'd be enough mutual aid that they could get through it. But it's worth noting that like AFSCME was running all of this on a shoestring budget.
Yeah.
And they were hoping that they could win big.
I mean, you've seen the commercial. That's
that's where all of those $2 million went. It was just to make that commercial. Despite all of that, the workers themselves were sticking it out through all of this. The picket lines were all staffed or were all full. And even though they had lost the nurses and some of the hospital support staff, everyone else was still not budging off that line.
Okay.
Then July 4th, the state finally started to budge. State negotiator Thomas Lane offered a 9% wage increase over the next 2 years.
Okay.
Late in the night of July 3rd, the bargaining committee adjourned for 20 minutes and then returned with a counteroffer of $1,500 a year raise for all members with a 1-year contract, along with amnesty for all workers currently out on strike. So basically, they wanted to get a solid chunk of money for everyone and then take a year to organize so they could fight this fight again next year. They also recognized like Shap just budged, which hadn't happened at all during these negotiations. So they wanted to try and push that and then reorganize and fight again. So now, Saturday, July 5th, there was finally a resolution reached. A 2-year contract was approved by the bargaining committee with a 6% raise each year, coupled with an automatic 5% raise that the state already offered. The first year of the contract would see a 3.5% immediate raise and an additional 2.5% after January 1st. That seems overly complicated, but whatever.
You're telling me.
Yeah. But this was mostly actually a victory for Shap because he got them to accept a 6% raise rather than an 11 or a 9%.
Yeah, I guess so.
And the bargaining committee was apparently pretty much divided on whether or not they should actually accept it or stick it out. So some were annoyed because they could have gotten a 6% raise without a strike, or they thought they could get a 6% raise without a strike. Others were basically saying, like, we got beaten in the courts too much. There was nothing we could do about this.
Yeah.
So we have to reorganize and figure out a way to win these fights without opening ourselves up to injunctions. And in the end, they ended up accepting it. McKenty went to the press and said they're going to start looking for national legislation as a more realistic answer to prevent all of those injunctions instead of fighting everything out in the state courts, because he also recognized that the state courts are going to be subject to state politics, which is going to be tied to the governor. So it's all going to be one organization that they're fighting. Whereas if he can get it into federal courts, that's at least a little bit more separation. But AFSCME DC 13 still exists, and they still represent 65,000 Pennsylvania Commonwealth employees. So they didn't completely lose, but it was still, and they still set history by having the first major statewide municipal workers strike. Yeah. Which is pretty cool.
It is.
If you can get labor law to be a little bit more on your side, it makes everything a lot easier.